Hello, everyone, and welcome to WriterSpeak, a program dedicated to the written word and those who produce it. I am your host, Jeane Slone, and the author of 3 historical fictions, She Flew Bombers, She Built Ships, and She Was an American Spy During World War II. I'm also a distributor of local books in Sonoma County shops. Today in the studio, I am happy to introduce Zaks Zaikine. Welcome to WriterSpeak, Zak.
Hi, thanks for having me again. And as I did in my last interview, I brought my little magic cap, and this gives me extra magic creativity. So I'm going to be donning it. It feels like it's a kind of a little bit bigger than a yarmulke, but I feel like in your presence that I'm in either church or temple. So I feel very honored to be here. So thank you for having me.
It's nice to see you again, and I see you're more magical with the cap on.
Well, if I start flying around the room, then you'll probably have to capture me a little bit. And that's a very nice segue that I got to actually meet somebody who flew around the whole planet. But in the theater that my mom took me when I was growing up, she would take me to Broadway. I grew up in New York. And one day, about 40 years later, I was at an art show that was held on Valentine's Day, about 1985 in Southern California. And before the actual opening and the crowds were coming in, there was a very tiny lady that was also walking around the gallery. And I had gone into a room in which they had my small bronze works that were sort of kind of metaphysical. There were unicorns and little elves and sprites. And I was looking at how beautifully they had set up this particular room. And I looked over, and there was this very diminutive woman standing there, and she said to me, "You and I both know that these creatures once existed." And I said, "Yes." And my complete gaze dove into her blue eyes, and I just sank in. And I said, "Oh my God." I said, "My mom took me to see you on Broadway, and we sat in the first row, and Peter Pan, it was Mary Martin." And we sort of interacted for about 15 minutes, and then the public came in, and of course she was whisked away. But that experience, and I've had many of those interactions with special people, that just gives you that almost like little goose pimples, on your back. But
or a magical moment.
It was definitely a magical moment, yeah. And I've been so lucky to experience them, and then also to actually turn them into my art.
I see that you have a great imagination, and that has helped you, of course, in your artwork and your writing. I'd like to talk a little bit about your past and how your father was a Russian muralist painter, and how that influenced your Russian heritage in your artwork.
Yes, very much so. As one reviewer once wrote, that I make modern day icons. Mm-hmm. And I grew up in a very spiritual and religious upbringing, that there were icons in every room, and every morning a candle was lit in the icon, and they lasted for the whole day. We also did prayers throughout the day. Every meal there was a basic prayer, and since I interacted with my dad on several of his mural paintings in churches, I would live with the priests. In Russian Orthodox, the priests are allowed to marry and have children. And so the household sometimes was pretty active besides being the local priest that would take care of issues, with the parishioners. He would have his own family, and the interaction with my dad, who would first sketch the actual churches. He would go to the church and he would measure everything, then build the scaffolding that would then climb up the scaffolding and lay on his back a la Michelangelo and paint, these incredible mystical Marys and St. Peters. And sometimes during breaks or lunch, he would throw a rope down and I would tie his brushes or paints, and he would say, I need some more vermilion. And I would tie, the colors, and he would hoist it up. And sometimes he would be up there for quite some time.
Well, it sounds like your painting was just in your blood since you've been painting since you were 4.
Yes. Yeah, in fact...
Remarkable.
I grew up in a tenement in Queens and Long Island, and it was kind of like the United Nations, that the different people that lived there, the mothers, because most of the dads worked during the day, would take care of the children. And one day my neighbor, Mrs. Nadler, as a matter of fact, it's amazing I can remember their names.
You have a remarkable memory.
Yeah.
Since talking to you many times, I'm like, how can he go back that far?
And Mrs. Nadler came over and she said, gosh, that looks just like Mickey Mouse. And she said, do you think I could have it? And I said, well, if I give it to you, then I don't have it. But if you give me 25 cents, I'll draw you another Mickey Mouse. And so that was my first sale.
Oh.
Yeah.
Now, I'd like to brag a little bit about you, that you have been awarded numerous grants and fellowships, including the New York City Artists Fellowship, Foundation Award, the Paula Krasner Grant, and the Gottlieb Foundation Grant. And you are pretty talented. How many books have you published? Do you actually know the number?
Well, the very first book was when I was 8 years old. I went into my cellar, and with construction paper and a stapler, I put together 6 or 7 books. And then I went around my neighborhood and I actually sold those books. So somewhere, who knows, there may be, but in terms of hardcover, softcover, I started publishing in 1969, and I have 4 books of poetry and 5 children's books, but in the last 2 years I've illustrated 2 children's books for separate authors. In fact, this is the most recent one. This is Santa Tweaks Tradition. I really like the story, and Wayne Proden is the author of it, and it's actually, you can purchase it. He has them on Amazon and I think eBay, and it just came out about 2 months ago.
I love the title, Santa Tweaks Tradition.
Yeah, it's about the fact that he's wants to give the reindeers a rest, so he builds this kind of more energetic sled that could zip him around so he could get back home to have his own cookies and tea earlier. But then it's the story of sort of mishaps that happen. And by the way, if people wanted to contact Wayne directly, he's a very interesting character. Can I give his number out? Or should
Sure, or we could just put it in the credits.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
probably easier for people. So we'll make sure it's in the credits, that information about Wayne Proden.
Right, and I get approached probably once every 5 or 6 weeks. Some author wants me to illustrate their book. And over the years, I've had dozens and dozens of authors, but I'm pretty picky. And in 45 years, I've only actually taken on 2 books because of the fact that if it's just another story to block our vision of the sky, why do it? And so that's a situation that has been pretty much sometimes a difficult thing to live with because of the fact that there's so much, and I've been a recyclist most of my life, and actually my books are produced 100% recycled. I use soy-based inks, so if your little kid or baby starts eating my book, there'll be no problems with that.
I know you recently wrote another book that's in the works,
Yes,
really.
yeah.
Dancing by the Light of the Moon.
Yeah, and
it's good for everybody to know, the local Santa Rosa people who in the audience, that it's about the Russian River.
Yep. In fact, back in 96 and 97, when we had a torrential El Nino, and we're going to have another one.
We hope.
Well, no, it's more than hope. I've been channeling Ben Franklin since I was a kid.
I
And
remember the 96 flood.
Yes.
People canoeing down down River Road.
Right.
In Forestville,
Right.
Guerneville.
And how I know this is that, as I just mentioned, in terms of Poor Richard's Almanac, which Ben Franklin issued because he had a printing press and he did a lot of his own printing. And I've watched that since late July, acorns have been falling profusely. So that's my indication that they're getting ready to be planted by the rains. So
It is good to be aware of different signs of what is to come.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so Dancing by the Light of the Moon, that I wrote in the early 2000s, but by the time I've re-edited and put all the graphics together, it's now ready. It's actually going to go to the printer. And what I did was that all the fish in Sonoma County, including in front of my house, were jumping out of creeks. So I sent them to the Sea of Tranquility for a vacation. And that's how we get Dancing by the Light of the Moon. And they travel up there, they have an adventure, and then they come down, and maybe we'll just leave that to when the book is issued, and folks can, get copies of it.
And everybody will be able to look for it on your website,
Yes.
which will list at the end of the credits. And that's Dancing by the Light of the Moon.
Correct.
And Zak, you're so multi-talented. Now we need to talk about Zak the poet.
Okay. Actually, I am producing 2 new volumes. I haven't had my poetry published in quite some time, and I've been working on, for the last 2 years, my first new volume is Together Again. And I'm also actually at the same time writing a sequel. So it's like part 1 and part 2.
Oh, nice.
So first part is Together Again, and then the second part is Together Forever. And I actually brought some poetry from the books.
Wonderful. So we'll get to hear Zak's poems.
Song. You sing a song, you sing it to yourself. You hear it, and who else? Where do you sing? In your room, your bedroom. No person is there at the time, except your loyal, loving kitty. She looks at you and smiles and answers with her paw, a touch on your arm, a connection with both hearts. In the corner. Why do you live in the corner of my shower room? Maybe because it is safe, high above the ground, a vantage point to see everything. Protected. You are a visitor, a protected. My grandmother would always say, when we found someone like you in our home, you would be always safe and secure, appreciated, since as we would remark, you were an ancient relative reborn to keep us protected and watched over. Thank you, Angel Spider. We bless you.
Nice.
This is one of my favorites. Reflections. Let the bread rise slowly. So I learned something today, which was very important to me, and I give out what comes back. We all know this, but do we really realize it to the full extent, to the capacity of what we perceive? And that perception gets colored by what we are really wanting. Showing love and concern to others is a natural to me. Did I inherit this? Is it in my DNA? Was my birth moment fixed by planetary vibrations sent to the exact location of that first breath? Did all the interactions with people, the plants, the animals, have a making of a loaf of bread that was kneaded, pampered, raised, covered, and kneaded again? Then baked slowly to eventually be enjoyed piece by piece, slice by slice, sweet yet tart, a bit sour, not too saltly. Oh, so satisfying. Can I break bread with you?
I love the ending.
Window. I look out my window and dream. The person I love has my back. Do I realize this, or am I still searching for more? I am comforted by the fact he allows me my space. And that alone gives me stability and a real balance of our love. I see you. Hey you, I see you. You see me. Helpmates matted to the earth. The place we visited a lot and cherished every moment. My recent moments with you will always live inside my heart, etched into my soul, and carries my spirit to new and unparalleled heights, together as one, yet separate as the two. One other one?
Nice. Okay, this one more will
Sure.
probably work wonderful.
Okay. Our high wire act. Life is like the funny papers, especially now with all the things that are happening with our political situation. Our high wire act. Life is like the funny papers, a slice of life on different lines. We each walk our own tightrope as we balance each moment, and sometimes gently fall as we are caught by the net below. I have experienced this actually, both metaphysically and in reality, and have been saved by the net and loving hands. Now I have removed my high wire act from visual sight and will still share it through these written pages, which will fulfill another net, which catches dreams and turns them into reality.
Nice. Thank you for sharing your poetry.
And in terms of the reality, I lived for a long time bi-coastal, here in California and back in Woodstock, New York, and I had 2 studios.
Oh.
So in the wintertime, we would come here, and in the summertime, we would go to Woodstock. Mm-hmm. And one year, we decided not to come back to California, and I couldn't believe the brutality of the winters in upstate New York.
You forget how bad that can be.
And the snow would be, up to over the car would be buried. And so I threw everybody in the family into the car, and I drove them down to Florida. And we camped. And during the day, we would go to different locations in Florida. I mean, it's an incredible place. The gardens, and going out on lakes and taking into the Everglades. And then one day the Barnum and Bailey Circus is where they spend their winters, and they actually have performances, and where they're experimenting with new acts and what have you, and get quite a lot of people. And I think there actually was for free in a big tent, and there must have been maybe 10,000 people there that day. And the guy who was like the master of ceremonies, he asked for volunteers to walk the high wire act, you know, and since I never did that, and I was with my family, I raised my hand, and they had me come down, strapped me up, and went up a couple of 100 feet.
Well, you aren't afraid of heights because your dad was
Yes.
always on
You got it.
scaffoldings anyway. Yeah.
Yes, and I got to experience walking across the tightrope, and then they said, okay, now you jump, you know, because the net will catch you. And they also did have a little bit of a leash, you know, with me, but that was a really a high point. And then, of course, the whole audience, you know, would just hoot and holler. And so that, when I was writing that poem, I recalled that particular experience.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see. I'd like to also talk about your art. I know that your art has been in galleries all over the United States. In looking at your website, it's amazing to see all the different media that you use, such as steel, right,
Yes.
for outside.
Right.
And what are the other
Well, I've
medias?
been working with ceramic the
Yeah,
longest.
ceramic.
I grew up in Flushing, Long Island, and there was a school being built. My original, well, it was going to be a junior high, but there were mud flats there, and I used to go and get clay, and I would work on it, but I couldn't fire it, so they would eventually fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
So when I did actually start the junior high, there was electives, and I took ceramics, and it was a natural for me. Mm-hmm. So I began working in ceramics and have continued to work in them, but I have also worked at drawing, illustrating. I love, I guess the best analogy would be that I channel Pablo Picasso. Mm-hmm. There wasn't anything that he didn't work in, and I've worked in almost every different media, and I keep working in the media until it just doesn't feel right anymore. So I'll particularly say, sort of milk my energy. For instance, I went back to study with a master painter in Woodstock in my 40s, because I felt I had accomplished, but I wanted to now be working with somebody that could cover all my bases, sort of like when I was a baseball player. In fact, I wanted to be a baseball player, and I used to stay after the game with some of the coaches to learn how to bunt better or steal bases. So by getting a master painter, Nicholas Buhalis was his name, what he did was he taught me that I already knew what I knew, but by actually drawing, if I drew you, the best gift he ever gave me was to draw the outside of you, to draw the space around something. And if I was able to draw the space like I'm drawing right now with my hand and my eye, you would then fit right in. And that was such a blessing. Just like what you do personally, and we really should mention and give a plug to Rosie the Riveter. You know, you were sharing before we went on camera about the gathering that you had with some of the original people that were working, the women for the war effort. So please say a couple of words on that.
Well, I got to go to Richmond Marina, and they broke the world record in the Guinness Book of World Records for 1,084 look-alike Rosie the Riveters, and a lot of the originals in their 90s were there, and that was fabulous.
Yeah.
But let's go back to you.
Alrighty.
I noticed a lot of your artwork, it's whimsical, such as even this marvelous painting.
Yeah, this is.
But your sculptures are also very sensual. So you really can convey many different emotions with your artwork.
Yeah, what I do is when I get into what I'm doing, I become the work. Like, for instance, this is from Eugene's Magical Dreams, and I've revised this slightly, and this is an actual painting. I don't just do little illustrations, I do finished paintings. This is on canvas, mixed media, and it takes me anywhere from a week to 3 weeks to complete this, and then it gets scanned and put into a format, either a JPEG or a PDF file, and then when it gets printed in the book, which is, this is the image here, the actual image of it. And so, and it doesn't lose anything because I have a really wonderful individual who works on my books, and we work very closely. And we have, as I said, these are then scanned and put into a file. And hopefully we could get these printed somewhere here in America, but it's still, for some reason, people don't want to, the materialism of our country is still too great, and I can send this to China and have it produced fairly reasonably. And the agent that went over there to see how there's no sweatshops, they're treated beautifully, the print shops can actually house all the people. They don't even have to go back to their home. They have their own little place that they can live, and they're fed, and they're out. China's very big, so it would be equivalent to maybe having a business out in Occidental or somewhere. And so
well, it's wonderful that you know the background of exactly what is happening, because a lot of our authors struggle about, well, should I have my book made in China or Korea, or or should I pay the extra money and stay in the United States? So it sounds like you have a good background, that your work is being produced by people who aren't suffering. That's mainly.
Yeah, that is my main objective. And for the audience, in terms of, maybe we could talk a little bit about how to produce a book, because I'm sure there's a lot of authors out there.
Yeah, we have a lot of authors watching our program.
Yeah, and I think number one is, and I feel like everybody's got a story, whether they're going to be producing it for their family or themselves, is that you could do your own therapy by writing your own story, you see. And faithfully, especially if you've got, regardless of whether you've got a 9-to-5 or you're retired or what have you, you get up at a certain time, and it would be like a mantra, or a meditation. So you do your yoga, you have your smoothie, you go for a walk, and then you set aside that time regularly. You start off with just writing maybe 100 words, and then you could build it up to maybe spending an hour.
And are you talking about 7 days a week?
Well, the thing is that once you get addicted, then you're carrying your iPad or you're actually recording all the time and you're creating stories. Just make sure that you're not texting and driving at the same time. But the thing is that is so healing for you. And if you've got therapists, or psychologists or, shrinks that you're spending a lot of extra time, you could be your own shrink. In fact, sometimes you could just sit in front of the mirror, and you write your story and you can get to see yourself and it then just flows right out.
There's an idea.
And then what you do is then you could approach, there's print on demand. I originally started off with ex libris. I don't like the fact that it takes sometimes weeks to make one correction. And I have a lot of Aries energy in me, and that's why I self-publish. Because if I want to redline something, and take care of it, I can do it right away. But when you're working with a house that's outside of you, a printing house, then that could also be a difficult situation.
Yeah. I would like to tell our audience, where can they buy your books and your artwork?
Okay, my main gallery is in Bodega, and not Bodega Bay, but the town of Bodega. It's right across the street from the fire department, and it's called the Bodega Landmark Studio.
Good.
And Lorenzo is the owner, and he's a magical person in himself. If I've got stories, he's got even more stories that he can share.
Look for that address and name of the gallery in the credits.
Yeah, and also too, locally, Corix carries my children's books. Amazon. You can also, another gallery I've been with, I can't believe it, over 40 years, is Hand Goods. Out in Occidental.
Yeah.
And I've been with them since 1975.
Yeah,
and
they're wonderful.
Magical people.
Yeah.
And they carry not only my books, but my greeting cards, my paintings, and some of my sculpture.
And so that's Hand Goods in Occidental.
Yeah.
And also, we're going to list your website, and a lot of your work can be bought directly through your website.
Sure, and absolutely.
So we'll list that in the credits.
Oh, well, thank you.
It's easier than saying it.
Sure, thank you so much.
So please visit Zak's website for his work. And I'd like to thank you, Zak, for joining us on WriterSpeak. WriterSpeak is produced at the C Media Lab in Santa Rosa. We would also like to thank our sponsor, the Sonoma County Gazette. Please join us next time for another exciting interview with a talented author.